Hey Haley, how are you?
I'm doing fabulous. How are you doing, Erica?
I'm doing so well, and I'm so excited to chat with you today. Something that we're doing on Marketing Happy Hour is going beyond who we are just when we show up at work and just caring about the full person, the whole person. And I think part of that is having these conversations about how we can best support ourselves and be our healthiest selves. And so, chatting with you today is going to be incredible and a great resource for our listeners. But before we dive in, I do have an important question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, what is in your glass this afternoon?
That's a great question. So I'm drinking a Gorgie energy drink right now. It's basically a better for you energy drink. It's one of the companies I'm consulting for. It's a watermelon flavor and it's my personal favorite. But if you'd ask me in a few hours, this would definitely be a Gorgie spicy skinny margarita with a little bit of watermelon on top.
Oh my goodness. Well, I know Cassie and I both have been dying to try Gorgie. We've seen it all over social media, so we'll have to try it sometime soon. I haven't yet, but I actually have a mother kombucha. It's the serene tropical guava flavor. It looks like a bottle of beer, which is incredible, but it's a local brand. It's a local brand out of, I think, St. Petersburg or St. Petersburg, Florida. So shout out to Mother Kombucha. We love you. They also, I believe the founder of this brand is coming on the podcast, so we'll be able to chat with her a little bit more. But let's dive right into the conversation today. We want to chat through some tips to, stay healthy and properly nourished as young professionals. But could you just share a bit about your background and kind of how you landed in the role that you're holding today?
Absolutely. So my name's Hailey Gorski and I'm a LA-based media dietitian. And the reason I entered the nutrition industry is because I grew up with two older brothers and they were always trying to put on weight for football or lacrosse or whatever it may be. And there is a little Hailey, and I never learned about portion control or whatever it may be because it was literally like fighting for food at the dinner table. So when I was in college, I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's hypothyroid, gained 20 pounds, and I initially didn't know what the reason was. So I went to the internet and social media to be like, hey, what is wrong with me? How can I fix this? How can I, use nutrition to be a great way to, lose the weight, just feel more energized. And I went online and I was so confused. There's so much conflicting information. It's so confusing. And I felt like there's a lot of unqualified people on the platform and nobody really could provide me with actionable advice. I felt like I was just running in circles. There's, fear mongering Felicia. We got almond mom Amy. We got all the people, feeding you that confusing information. So how can I tell fact from fiction? And I entered nutrition because I wanted to kind of solve that with an evidence-based background. But also I really wanted to infuse and work in media and social media because social media is a great way to amplify that to many people who are very confused because it's expensive to work with a private practice dietitian. I also do that as well. But again, it's a little bit more individualized, but I think social media is a great tool to educate people at scale for free. And it makes it a lot more accessible and approachable too. And I think in my content, I really try to have that approachable happy hour tone because I want nutrition to be fun and enjoyable. And that's how you adhere to your nutrition goals in your journey.
Oh my gosh, I love what you're doing. And I think that's so needed, especially today with, millennials and Gen Z, they're getting all of their information on social media. It's no longer searching on Google to find all of these conflicting things, but it's more so searching on social media and still finding a lot of conflicting advice. So excited to kind of dive into the meat of the episode here and talk to you a little bit about our diets and what we should be including every day to maintain our health. Could you just give us a little bit of perspective around that?
Absolutely. So I think with nutrition, you really need to kind of meet yourself where you're at and think about like, what is my end goal? And also, when you think about it, there's so many different ways you can go about nutrition. There's weight loss, there's weight gains, there's weight maintenance, there's creating a healthy relationship with food. And I want you to think less of addressing the smoke and more about addressing the fire. What's the root cause of that? And very often people want to fix what isn't broken. They're like, should I go gluten free? Should I, cut out all dairy in my diet? And that's not necessary. There are no real reasons or prompts to do that. So I like to really simplify things and tell people, hey, what is the root cause behind your issue? And how can we kind of come up with this very simple and approachable way to do that? It's not by cutting things out of your diet 90% of the time. It's more of focusing on that abundance mindset. So one thing I tell a lot of my private clients and on my social media accounts as well, I tell people to make the foundation of their meals PP, a produce and a protein. And it's an easy, very simple way to remember that. And again, it's all comes back to simplicity. So if you start with a produce, You ensure that you're hitting a variety of nutrients, you're getting your micronutrients in your diet. And if you have protein, you feel more satiated from those meals. So it's easier to adhere to your nutrition goals. But like, let's address, the elephant in the room. Your girl loves this little treat too. Like, how can I still enjoy my nutrition journey and not cut all this stuff out? The notorious third P I say is portion control. So I like to kind of use that rule of thumb when I am picking foods at home or dining out with my girlfriends, just as a kind of a North Star. And then obviously you kind of adjust from there.
Oh, absolutely. And I love that it's so easy to remember the two P's or potentially three P's if you wanted to talk about portion control too. But I want to hear from you. Are there any like supplements or anything like that that we should be taking on a regular basis that are in addition to the diet staples like the protein and the produce and things like that?
Yeah, so I think supplements are a great way to fill in the gaps of your diet. However, I think a lot of people are so quick to run to the supplement section in the grocery store before even thinking about the produce or the protein or, maybe the portion. But I think what I really recommend people doing is first focus more simply. Hey, what's the foundation of my diet? What am I truly eating day to day? What's the 80% of my diet? And then from there, you can kind of like fill in the gaps with those supplements as well. Again, I always like to say, like, don't fix what isn't broken. Don't try to make nutrition more complicated, because that's when you spiral and you're like, hey, I feel like I can actually not take any action towards my goals because I'm so confused. So don't fix what isn't broken. Don't cut things out. Don't try to add things without an actual reasoning behind it. So let's say, for example, you do have some dietary restrictions. I have some clients who have allergies, intolerances, medical conditions, religious or cultural reasons, or ethical reasons why they can't eat certain foods. So with that, because you do have to take things out of your diet, I think that supplements are a great way to kind of fill in those gaps and just also make sure that you are kind of hitting your goals, because sometimes you're traveling, sometimes you're just busy, sometimes you don't have all the time in the world to make sure you're hitting a variety of produce to, get a variety of micronutrients. So I think it's a great way to kind of supplement again and really come back to just the term itself. But it's not a complete necessary thing to have in your diet.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm curious too, you hit on this a little bit with the portion control element, but do you have any thoughts around what we should do when we do have cravings for some of the things that might not be so healthy for us and how we can kind of combat that in our diets?
Absolutely. So I think number one, I always like to tell people, like, how hungry are you when you're having that craving? Because if I'm being honest, like, I am all about the balance and everything. And there's no food that's off limits with myself or with any of my clients. I mean, again, unless they're like freaking allergic to peanuts, please don't eat any peanuts. But I like to tell them there's nothing off limits. But before you go into dessert, make sure that you aren't super hungry, because if you're super ravenous, it's going to be impossible to practice portion control. So before you go into enjoying a silly little treat, I always like to call it, or a mindful indulgence, check in with yourself and say, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hungry am I? And am I going for this indulgence because I'm just fucking hungry? Or is it because it's a true craving? So that's one thing I always like to recommend people doing. And then the next thing too is I recommend this to a lot of my private clients, but don't keep those treats in your house if you really do struggle to practice portion control or whatever. And it's not because you can't eat it. It's because you can go out to an ice cream shop, and that adds a little friction point to say, hey, is this a true craving? Am I really willing to go out of my way to enjoy this little treat? Or I'm like, I mean, if I have to like drive 5 minutes to the ice cream shop, like, I really don't care that much about it. So it kind of helps you add that extra barrier to have the treat. So you can kind of define whether it's an actual worth it mindful indulgence to you, or if it's just like, I mean, ice cream, like, who doesn't want ice cream any time of the day?
Yeah.
And
Oh my gosh. Yes.
exactly. And back to the third notorious third P is practice portion control. For example, I was out with some of my coworkers last week. We were in Anaheim for a convention, and we went to the ice cream shop, and I was like, hell yeah, I want a little treat, but I don't need a necessarily like full like 5 scoop situation. I'm like, I just need to scratch my itch for this. So instead of going for the bigger cups, I literally just ordered a kitty cup, and I had a few bites. I'm like, I'm satisfied. I'm full for my dinner. Like, that's all I kind of need. So I think that's a great way to navigate it, and try to keep it as simple as possible, and try to not, get in your head and like have any guilt around it or anything. I think too, the language we use around those indulgences, rather than calling it bad food, call it a mindful indulgence, because you take ownership of that decision. And when you make the active decision to enjoy it, you do have no regrets.
Absolutely. I love that. I love reframing it in your mind too as like it's not necessarily bad. It's just, something that you have the taste for and you want to make this mindful indulgence like you said. I love that. So what kind of snacks can we have on hand to whether it's combat those cravings or to just like maintain a healthy diet throughout the day? A lot of people talk about like swapping out your candy bar for like a date with peanut butter or like things like that. What are some like key things that you always recommend having on hand?
Yeah, so I always go back to the PP, a protein and a protein. And this is actually a little rule of thumb I learned from a dietitian I shadowed when I was a dietetic student, Dawn Jackson Blattner. Shout out to the queen herself. And she would always say focus on having a produce and a protein for snacks because the produce is great because it'll help you get those micronutrients, but also it contains fiber. And fiber will kind of help you stabilize your blood sugar levels. When you think about it during a work day, like, I mean, you're stressed out, so that's going to fuck with your blood sugar levels. You're eating whenever you can, and it's not necessarily on a consistent schedule. So you want to make sure that you are getting that blood sugar management. And also the protein will help with that as well. And also it'll help you stay fuller for longer. So I like to recommend kind of combining those two. And that can include like a date and almond butter or like carrots and hummus, carrots and hard boiled eggs. My personal favorite is having tzatziki. I pronounce it wrong every time. Tzatziki with cucumber slices. It is so freaking delicious. And tzatziki tastes so freaking good. It's so fresh and it's a great source of protein and it's got probiotics too. So I'm like, it's a win-win all around.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And you mentioned too, like working all day, you might not have time to eat the healthiest or to plan meals and things like that, or indulge in elaborate healthy meals. What are some ways that you suggest we can still lead a healthy lifestyle and get the nutrients we need to be successful in our day, despite those limited times? You talked about the protein and the produce and the portion control, and all of that is amazing. But how can we make sure that we're hitting that?
Absolutely. And with this too, you got to meet yourself where you're at. You're probably on Zoom calls all day. You're sitting at your desk, maybe you have a little bit more of a sedentary lifestyle, but you're still super busy with work. And there's always more work to do. There's always more emails to do. And just the thought of making a meal can feel really, really freaking overwhelming. You come home from the end of a work day and you're too exhausted, your battery's depleted, and you're like, the last thing I want to think about is making a full, healthy meal. I'd rather order takeout. And that's a common challenge a lot of my clients experience and myself too. And I'm like, I'm so tired from work. I'm still a dietitian, but it's like, I don't necessarily have, the extra energy always to prepare a full elaborate meal. So what I recommend my clients doing is two things. The first one is to ingredient prep. So what you do instead of meal prepping, sometimes the meal gets soggy and it just gets disgusting and not very appetizing, to ingredient prep the food. So for example, cutting vegetables or buying a rotisserie chicken. That's my freaking favorite food probably of all time. But getting a rotisserie chicken and shredding it ahead of time, or grilling steak ahead of time, or just like preparing it and marinating it and minimizing the steps that it takes to complete a recipe. So the recipe is a lot more approachable and it's easier to do that with your limited energy and your limited time after a long work day. So that's the first thing I recommend doing. And then the second thing too, even sometimes you have all the ingredients prepared and you're like, I still feel like I don't want to do this. So I call this like an emergency meal, but one of my clients, I assigned her a little action item from our last call, and it was to come up with 3 different recipes that require literally no work. So one example would be red lentil pasta, frozen veggies, marinara sauce, and then frozen chicken meatballs. It's super simple. The chicken meatballs are already prepared. You just have to basically boil water, put the pasta in, mix everything together, make sure that the frozen vegetables are defrosted. And that's a super simple, balanced recipe that's going to provide a ton of fiber, a ton of protein, and a ton of micronutrients, which will help you adhere to your nutrition goals.
Oh, that's so awesome. And such a great recommendation around ingredient prepping. I feel like there's a lot of information out there about meal prepping, and people just see it as this huge undertaking that you have to get done on a Sunday, and it has to last you throughout the week. And then they run into issues like the meals get soggy or they don't taste as good or they're not in the mood for that particular meal on Friday when they prepped it on Sunday. I can see that happening a lot. So having those ingredients prepped and ready to go no matter what recipe you're using them in is probably an incredible tip. And I will actually be implementing that as well. So thank you for
Let's
that.
go.
Yes. But when we're going to the grocery store, there's a lot of products out there that look like they're healthy for us, but they might not be. I would love to hear from your perspective when we're browsing the shelf, how can we kind of know if something is good for us? What ingredients should we be looking out for that could kind of have a negative impact on our health?
So nutrition is super complex because there are a lot of foods that are processed. And I mean, by definition, if you would buy cut up pineapple, that is a form of processed foods. But I think what you really want to look out for is those ultra processed foods. Processed foods honestly have such a bad reputation because people say that they're gonna, promote obesity or, help you or increase your risk of certain chronic diseases. And I think they are kind of misbranded. So I think it's okay to get things that are a little bit processed, like, I mean, obviously cut a pineapple, that's great for your health. But even things that have a longer shelf life, like canned tuna or canned beans or things like that, and things that may have a little of some additives, it is fine, of course, in moderation, because it helps that shelf stability. It makes food a lot more accessible to a wider range of people, especially people who live in food deserts and things like that. So I think it is fine to have some of those processed foods, but what you really want to look out for is those ultra processed foods where it's those foods that, I mean, typically these are, very, very processed and they're very hyper palatable as well. There's this definition of hyper palatable foods. I don't know if you've ever experienced or like felt like you're like addicted to a certain food, but hyper palatable food basically that are high fat, high in salt, and high in simple sugars. And do I eat hyperpalatable foods as a dietitian? Absolutely. But I just am very, very mindful of it and I'm very aware so I can, make the active decision of doing it with it or engaging with it. So look out for those hyperpalatable foods because it does make it a lot more challenging to practice portion control, adhere to nutrition goals, and what you want to be, a few bites of chips or whatever it may be, can easily turn into eating the full bag of a family size or whatever because it is so hard to stop eating. So I'd say that's the one thing I'd say avoid most of the time, but truly also like you can't put foods on a pedestal and say, hey, I love chips, I can't eat chips, because then that's going to kind of contribute to the binge cycle. So that's another thing I'd recommend a lot of people look out for is to not go too far into the black and white mentality of food, but kind of live in the gray area and allow yourself to enjoy that 80/20 without guilt or shame.
There's a lot of speculation out there around like oils, especially in like oat milk. We are huge oat milk girlies, and we've heard so many bad things that like oat milk is horrible for you. So we're like trying to not do that. Do you have thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think with oat milk, I hear a lot of stuff online about seed oils. And again, it's very conflicting. Everything is super, super conflicting. And I value sustainability, but I think there are people who are like a lot more involved within that. And there are kind of different aspects that go into different things like canola oil or seed oils or things like that. But it really comes down to what your nutrition goals are, what your values are, and also what's accessible to you, what's accessible and what's affordable. And so yeah, there's very, very conflicting things, but I'd say at the end of the day, think about the dose of it too.
Okay, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And then also, we love snacks and we love brands, like fun brands that have fun snacks today. Do you have any favorite brands or favorite snacks that you would, recommend or just like want to shout out at all? That would be a good addition or a good thing to try for people out there who are like, okay, I want to make some great swaps or I want to make some changes in what I'm consuming during the day and maybe I don't want to have that heavily processed uh like I can think of like some cheese puffs or cheese balls or something like that. What can I reach for that is a little bit better for me?
I gotta say right now, I'm having such a moment with girl dinners. I love crackers so much. And it's something about like the mouthfeel, the crunch, the texture. It just makes the meal so much more satisfying. Also, I love dips. And if you have a good cracker, it is a great vehicle to have more dip. So I kind of like to involve that in my girl dinner as well. So I would say for brands wise, I mean, I'm loving the Simple Mills crackers right now. There's also this brand I found at Expo West. What was it called? It was like cheese or something, or like cheddar, or like I don't know, something like that. But it has these really good crackers that almost taste like a Cheez-It. They've got like these spicy ones which are super delicious. But one thing with snacks too is it's a-okay to have those snacks that maybe are a little bit more indulgent. But what I like to tell people is rather than cutting that out of your diet, focus on what you can add to that snack. So maybe I cut down the crackers, but I add some more cucumber slices for some more of that crunch. So I get that satisfying crunch, but I also get to enjoy the flavor of the, crackers if they are a little bit more indulgent.
Ooh, incredible. And my goal is to go to Expo West. I was supposed to go in 2020 and then it got canceled and I haven't been able to go back, but I would just love to experience. I'm such a big like food, beverage brand girly. And so being there, I'm sure was just an incredible experience. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about too is we love our happy hours at Marketing Happy Hour, obviously. And so do a lot of our listeners. So when we're thinking about happy hour or we're thinking about dining out or work events and things like that, what tips can you share around balancing these fun indulgences and these fun moments while also staying on track towards, our goals with health and wellness?
Absolutely. So when you talk about nutrition being so individualized, a big thing of that is what are those indulgences worth it that are worth it to you are? When we're talking about 80-20, what does that 20% look like? For some people, maybe it is a silly little cocktail. I mean, me personally, I love a spicy skinny margarita. So that's definitely my 20%. But you talk to someone else and they're like, I don't give a flying F about happy hour or cocktails or anything. I'm hyper fixated on the dessert. Like that's worth a treat for me. So I think I would very much encourage people to ask themselves, what are those worth it indulgences to myself? And maybe it's even a little bit of both. It's, hey, I'll enjoy a spicy skinny margarita and maybe I'll just like make sure I just like limit myself to one glass. And then I also want to have some, I don't know, nachos or something like that, but I'll be very mindful of the portion size. So kind of identify what those worth it indulgences are to you. And one thing I like to do too is like make my first bite a produce and a protein because it sets the tone before you even jump into the happy hour. And you also have to make sure that that actually is present at the table too. So those are a couple tips. But also I think something that's a little bit more actionable and tangible for people too. I like to use this thing called the Goldilocks method, which is kind of a combination of tracking calories while also using the hunger fullness scale. So with tracking calories, I think it does get a very bad rep, but I think it gets a bad rep when it's executed poorly and when it's not, having supervision of a dietitian who's very experienced within that. But I like to have my clients do a little bit of calorie cycling throughout the week with like, hey, Monday through Friday, I'm super routine, but the weekends, I love to indulge a little bit more. So maybe be a little bit lower in their calorie range on the weekdays, and on the weekends they can go a little bit higher. But also it's more focused on the calorie consciousness rather than being calorie obsessed. So allow yourself that flexibility and have a flexible mindset. But on the other side too, I always like to encourage them to practice the hunger fullness scale. So when you're going into happy hour, how hungry are you on a scale of 1 to 10? If you go into it and you're like, let's say like a 1 is like super hungry, a 10 is super full, and you're at a 1, you're like, I haven't eaten all day, I'm so ready for some food. You are going to it's so hard to make a sensible decision, and it's so much easier to eat past the comfortable fullness level because it takes our body some time to realize how full we are. So rather than going into a happy hour super hungry, have a protein bar before or have like a little meat stick ahead of time. So you are less hungry when you go into it, and it's easier to make a sensible decision while honoring your worth it mindful indulgences and your nutrition goals. So I think kind of combining those two of the calorie consciousness and adhering to the hunger fullness scale and checking in with yourself and saying, on a scale of 1 to 10, where am I at? Okay, I'm kind of 6 or a 7. I'm having a couple more bites, but I want to make sure I don't get too far up on that fullness scale because then I'll feel uncomfortably full and it's harder to stick to my nutrition goals and everything at that point.
Oh, absolutely. Such great advice. And what I'm hearing from you for the most part in this conversation is it's not about restriction. It's about moderation and just knowing what's right for you and your body and what's going to keep you fueled and focused throughout the day. And so I really appreciate you sharing all of these insights with our listeners. I think it'll be very, very helpful, especially for people who might not have, a ton of time throughout the day because they are busy and they are, focused on work. So thank you again for joining us, but we want to let everybody know where they can find you, follow along with what you're up to and the content that you're sharing, and then also inquire about any services that you might have.
Absolutely. So you can find me on any platform, TikTok, Instagram, the tipsy kale _ dietitian. I always like to tell people it's a mix of like tipsy nutrition tipsies, but also like your girl loves a spicy skinny marg, along with balancing that with a very healthy lifestyle. So that's kind of the reasoning behind the name. So you can find that across all social media platforms. And so what I do is I help nutrition clients create a healthy relationship with food while losing or maintaining weight. So that's my nutrition practice. And then I also work with a lot of brands on the media side and help them create content and do some storytelling as well. So that's kind of what I'm up to.
Oh my gosh, amazing. And we'll have everything linked in the show notes so people can contact you if they're interested in speaking to you about any of those opportunities. And they can also follow along with what you're posting out there. But any last tips you want to share around nutrition, dieting, anything like that before we part ways?
Absolutely. So I think one last thing I'd like to say is focus on consistency, routine over results. Just really focus on the day to day and don't get too hyper fixated on the results. So many people with nutrition are really excited about getting those results and getting to the next step in their journey, but focus on the routines, have patience with yourself, really just kind of do what's best for you and kind of stay laser focused on your nutrition goals and you'll freaking crush it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been so good.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Marketing Happy Hour podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. If you want more of Marketing Happy Hour but don't know where to start, we invite you to download our free Marketing Happy Hour starter kit at marketinghappyhr.com/starter-kit. This interactive magazine-style PDF walks through who we are, includes helpful resources like a marketing term glossary and the printable daily planner sheet that we actually use ourselves, and contains clickable links to our episode recommendations by subject area. Not to mention all the fun extras like a quiz, the link to our Marketing Happy Hour Insiders Facebook group, a word search, a playlist, a goal-setting guide, content inspo by month, and more. It's our hope that you'll dive into this resource and walk away more confident in your career journey with a group of industry pals that you can lean on for advice and support. Snag your free starter kit today at marketinghappyhr.com/starter-kit for all of the info you need to become a Marketing Happy Hour insider.